If we look at today's readings, actually tomorrow's readings, both the gospel as it was read, but also the first reading, which is taken from wisdom, and I'll call your attention to it. I think these are readings that tell us that what is good is not good enough. What is good is not good enough. What do I mean by that? Well, the first reading, as I said, is taken from the book of wisdom. It's a short reading. What we have here is the author saying, I prayed and prudence was given me. I pleaded and the spirit of wisdom came to me. And here's where he talks about, I preferred her to scepter and throne. Scepter and throne are good, but not good enough. Not as good as wisdom. And deemed riches, riches are good, but not good enough. I likened any priceless gem to her. A gem is good, but not good enough. I invite you to look at that. These are good things, but they're not good enough. Wisdom is better. This good, which is not good enough, it becomes very clear in the gospel. This young man who came to Jesus obeyed the law. That's good. Many of us are so happy if we even get that, obedience to the law, but it's not good enough. Or at least what was good in the past is no longer good in the present. That might be a better way of saying that. And I really think the linchpin is found in the letter to the Hebrews. When he talks about the word of the Lord, it is a two-edged sword, which means it cuts both ways. It cuts going in and it cuts coming out. It cuts from the left and it cuts from the right. Today, we would say it cuts to the bone. That's what we are being asked to do this week. We are being asked to allow the biblical message to cut us to the bone. Now, why do I say that? Or why do I suggest that? I have read recently something quoted by a quote from the Holy Father that he said back in 2015. It is, I think, a magnificent expression that is frightening, and that is, we are no longer living in an era of change. We are living in a change of era, which means in a certain sense, everything is up for grabs. Everything is being subject to change. Cosmologists tell us that. The new insights into cosmology tell us our whole understanding of what we are as human beings, as what we are as members of Earth community. We can use these words, and they are magnificent words, but they're still up in our heads, and it has not come down into the minds and hearts of so many of us. And I would be so bold as to say probably most of us, at least on a deep level, which means that what was good in the past isn't good enough anymore. Now, what we find further on in the gospel reading, what Jesus is talking about, of course, what the man must do is free himself of possessions, which is always a problem for all of us. Whether you take vows of obedience or not, I'd be willing to bet there is not a vowed religious listening to my voice who lives really out of poverty. We live out of abundance. We do. I mean, who really does not have what he or she really needs? So in a certain sense, it's not that, so the whole question of poverty, and I don't want to get into that because it's so difficult. It was so easy to know what it meant to be poor when the Constitution said 3 habits, 1 for every day, 1 for Sunday, and 1 for work. That was easy then. They even told you how many pair of underwear you could have. That was easy. Now, I don't know how often should I get my computer fixed, or not fixed, but at least replaced. I don't want to even get into that. But what's being said in the gospel has to do is, what are we attached to? What do we find so difficult to give up? I always say, again, those of us who are in the vow of poverty, everything I have belongs to the congregation. I firmly believe that, but they better not ask for me to give it up. They better not ask that I give the car back. All right. But for some of us, what we find difficult to give up is our sense of entitlement. We have a right to this. I mean, we have worked hard. We have lived good lives. Don't we have a right to retire in comfort, relative comfort? Don't we have a right for this? It's a question of entitlement. I don't know about you. Maybe I'm the only one who has to really examine herself. What do I think I have a right to? And then I have to ask myself, did I ever give up the right to have rights? So for some of us, to give up entitlement, we cling to that. We have a right to this. To give up our sense of being an individual and have to deal with the common good. We in the United States face that, I think, terribly. Common good ceases, I think, has ceased to be a value in the United States. And you see that in government, the common good, no, my party, my position, my committee. And again, I realize all of these are complicated issues, but they're our issues. The whole question about the common good and the right of the individual to deny or to refuse to be vaccinated. And I don't understand. There's so much about that I don't get what happened to common good. But common good is not a value. I have a right to this. I have a right to that. But we don't talk about common good. And if we are citizens of the United States or not, if we're living in the world of today, if we're living in the church of today, we may not picket for these issues, but we breathe it in the atmosphere and we have points of view. So we might have to be willing to give up our sense of individual rights for the common good. We might have to be willing to give up our reputation as an individual or as a community. On the one hand, I think of my congregation. We have solar panels. We have joined a land trust. I couldn't remember the words. A land trust. And on the one hand, I'm very proud of that. Now, I was not involved in making that decision, though I was involved in supporting the decision that was made. But there can also be, for many of us, I am not suggesting this is the case in my congregation. I've never seen it, but I use this as an example. When we do the right thing, it can be very easy to be arrogant about being right. It's very easy to be arrogant. I think success, whether that be professional success, spiritual success, I think success is very seductive. I think success, which I want. I don't want to be a failure. So it's not something that's easy to say, but I have, in my experience, it can be extraordinarily successful. I mean, seductive, because what sneaks in is a kind of arrogance. Look what we have done. Look what I have become. Look how smart I am. Look what we're doing on Saturday afternoon. That there can be a subtle kind of arrogance. So it's not just saying, again, I think, giving up certain things is really quite easy. It's knowing what to give up, knowing what really I am carrying on my back. The whole idea, as I'm sure we all know, or many of you would know, that, the eye of the needle, they're talking, that was a small doorway in one of the gates going into Jerusalem. A small doorway that a camel could not get through that small doorway. A camel, of course, carrying a load. And so they would have to unpack it and carry it in. But then if you unpack it, then you don't have the opportunity of riding in on a camel with this magnificent burden of riches that everyone would stand up and look at and think, aren't they wonderful? So that's what Jesus is talking about. It's very difficult, it's difficult to be prosperous. It's difficult, or if difficult, not the word, dangerous, seductive, to be prosperous, to be accomplished, to be right, to be applauded. At least I think it is. And so Jesus says it's, get rid of what you cannot squeeze through. That's where the metaphor of the eye of the camel comes in again. So we go back to, what Pope Francis says, that this is not a time where it is a change in the era. An era of change. We are going through a change of era. If we have more than we need, it is not out of charity that we share it. It is out of justice that we share it. Now, that's not at all part of capitalistic economic philosophy, but that certainly is out of the philosophy or the spirituality of the Gospels. What do we have? Who are we? And not just material goods. Who are we that we cling to? What do we have that we cling to that prevents us to squeeze through, that prevents us from recognizing that much change must go on in our lives. Much change must go on in our society. What was good that is no longer good enough? It was good once, but it's not good enough anymore. What is it in our individual lives? What is it in our church? Church is going through, parishes are going through significant change. Going back to being normal, whatever normal meant. And the question, of course, is always, who's normal? Not the normal of the dispossessed, not the normal of the unchurched, the normal of the ones who have something to say about church, the normal of the privileged, the normal of those whose voices are heard, and not all voices are heard. So the church has got to restructure itself, and I'm not talking simply about parishes merging. I'm talking about what happens when, or what has happened in the church as a result of COVID. Not just the practices, not just liturgical. That in itself is something. That when you could not go to liturgy, and not everybody felt that a live streaming liturgy, I don't want to say was adequate, but it was not a communal experience. And they got used to not going to liturgy. So how do we create a community? Not how do we get people back into the pews? How do we create a community? And not just how do the liturgical ministers, but we are church. How do we as church create a community? How do we as members of religious communities who may have been shut out of we have institutions. We have a mother house and where our retirement sisters live, and they're closed buildings. People cannot visit. It's not just, families, sisters cannot visit. The mother house is closed down. The retirement house is closed down. How do we recreate community? What was good in the past, but is not good enough anymore in the present? And what price are we willing to pay to recreate or restructure? That's what this new era is all about. Restructuring, recreating. That is a profound biblical tradition. What has died that now can grow out of, something new comes out of what has died or what we left behind. That's death, resurrection. That is the transformation. That is the new heaven and the new earth. How can we, each one of us, participate in creating something new out of, because it was within us. The past was within us, not simply in a book. And how can that something new be created? Or are we just going to, more of the same? Let's duplicate what we had before. I don't think in many ways we can. And the same thing in our country. How are we, you and I, not simply the Republicans and the Democrats in Washington, but the Republicans and the Democrats in Wisconsin and Maryland and Kentucky or wherever we are? How can we participate in recreating our country? Because if we leave it to others, we'll get what we deserve. How are we going to do that? Again, I want to say what was good in the past may not be good enough in this new era. It can be frightening, but just think, friends, you and I are privileged to participate in this restructuring, in this recreation, in this reshaping of a new country, of a new church, of a new parish, of a new community, of a new society. How are we going to do it? I got a lot of questions. I have no answers. Here's where it's nice to be part of a group, whether that group be a community, a local parish, but a group, because we can learn from each other. We can be inspired by each other. We can be challenged by each other. The gospel reading, good old Peter. We have left everything behind to follow you. The one thing Peter didn't leave behind was Peter. So in many ways, we leave things behind, but we don't leave ourselves behind. We don't leave that self that drags us down. We don't allow ourselves to be transformed. I myself, I always have a little trouble with retribution. And if you do this, you're going to get that. I realize it's fundamental not only to the biblical tradition, but to all of ethics. And in no way am I suggesting, that I am beyond thinking, that the only reason that I do anything that I'm supposed to do is because I want reward, that I am beyond that. I am beyond absolutely nothing except 25 years old. I'm way beyond that. But other than that, I am beyond none of this. However, I think to myself, the challenge is in there. Not do it so that you get reward, but do it so you can create a new heaven and a new earth. That I find exhilarating, to think that I am living at a time and can participate in the restructuring of society, of the church, of participating in the creation of the new heaven and the new earth, participating in creating what is, in moving out of what was good, but is no longer good enough, into who knows what. So just a few of at least my comments on this reading or these readings. Again, I go back to the image, excuse me, which I, though it's not in the letter to the Hebrews, I think the letter to the Hebrews, when it talks about the word of the Lord being a two-edged sword, the image that I find very, very powerful is cut to the bone. That's what I think these readings are doing or can do, cut to the bone. And how will that happen for you and for me and for us?